men of color, white anti-racist. We have educators, we have parents working with educators. And the work that they're doing is looking at white institutional culture, racism, institutional racism, and how it's embedded in that particular institution. And how, like for instance, education, okay? The educators would be taking a look at why is it that so many young black boys are being expelled from school? Why is the discretionary discipline harsh on young black students to the point that you're expelling and really throwing kindergartners out of school? So we're like socialized to believe that the problem is always the person and that you have to fix the person. Well, undoing racism is that people need services, yes, but that's not where the problem is. The problem is in the institution that drives that. So if you want to change the outcomes of young black boys failing out of schools, of course you've got to give support, but you've got to look at the school system and what's up with school systems that discipline young boys harshly and expel them in kindergarten. Why is there a difference in the way you're going to handle white boys acting out in kindergarten? Same thing in child welfare system. Before 1965, the child welfare system was almost completely white kids. And now, the largest population are black children being removed. Why? And so the greatest success that we've had is like in the state of Texas. There's a woman there. She's just like so awesome. Her name is Joyce James. When she was a social worker in Texas and she advanced to higher levels because she had this undoing racism understanding, she was looking at the children being removed. They were all the black kids. All the black children were being removed. And she's like, really? Like there aren't white children that are abused and neglected? And we know that's true. As a clinician, I'll tell you, there are many children that I hear about, you know, when they were younger, they come to me now, it's like, why weren't they removed? Because generally speaking, you give services to white people, but the stereotype and the embedded racism, the embedded bias is that if it's happening in the black community, there's abuse going on, there's neglect going on, and these children have to be removed. In fact, Joyce will tell you that according to the zip code, when they got a call in, if it was from a white neighborhood, they would go out and investigate. But if it's in a black neighborhood, they put the car seat in the back of the car because they know the kid's coming out. This is not just Texas, this is everywhere. We're in Westchester County, disproportionate children of color. So we're not saying that these social workers are bad. What we're saying is that there's a response, there's a culture that's happening in these institutions that it's allowing this to happen. It's normative. So the work that she did is she did what she calls turn the mirror inward, where everybody in the child welfare system went through this re-education. We call them gatekeepers, right? Certainly all the gatekeepers. They developed disproportionality specialists that had an anti-racist lens. They understood institutional racism, the history of it, and how institutional racism creates outcomes that are negative for people of color and benefit white people. After she put everybody through these trainings, they started to take a look at, you know, every point of entry for every case, and they did like an autopsy. You know what I'm saying? Like what happened here and how was it different with the white family than it was? And slowly but surely, they started to transform the culture of child protective services in the state of Texas. Data-informed strategies, right? So they started seeing the numbers coming down as the humanity started to return to the institution. And then instead of seeing these families as those families that were neglectful and abusive, they started seeing families like families in need. And with accountable relationships with the communities, they started to transform the way they worked. The numbers started coming down to the point where they also started to understand. She has a groundwater model, and we talk about that. it's not just child welfare. You got to look at the educational system. You have to look at the medical system. You have to look at the policing system. You have to look at the healthcare system. So she developed this, we call it the groundwater, that racism is in the groundwater and it seeps up into all of the institutions, and each of these institutions are connected. And so they started doing cross-systems work at the end of the day, where Health and Human Services, they started to training the education system, they started training the health system, they started training the juvenile justice system and the child welfare system, so they started working like teams. Why? If a child is removed, it increases the likelihood that there's going to be acting out in school. If a child is acting out in school, it increases the likelihood they're going to be out of school suspension, which increases the likelihood that they'll be involved with juvenile justice, which increases the right? So that's what they call it, from like the school. We call it from child welfare to prison pipeline. So they started dealing with all of the institutions together, that they all had to turn the mirror inward and to take a look at how they as an institution they were responding to communities of color in a way that ended up with negative outcomes. So she's doing that work all around, and we're starting to do that work here.
That's amazing. Well,